The night it all began smelled like rain, burnt wire, and betrayal. 12 hours into a marathon electrical shift, Jake Morrison rolled home with his hands shaking from exhaustion and pride. The clinic he'd just wired now had backup power strong enough to keep the lights on through hurricanes. His steel-toed boots hit the gravel with that heavy, end-of-day finality, the kind of sound that usually meant peace. But not tonight. His garage door rumbled open with its familiar mechanical growl, and for a split second he expected the soft gleam of copper coils and sawdust waiting inside. Instead, his headlights caught something foreign, curved metal and sterile white paint gleaming under the fluorescent light. A pearl-white Audi, spotless and smug, sat dead center in his workshop like a throne dropped into a church. Leather and motor oil mixed in the air, an expensive cologne fighting against the smell of honest work. The car's security system chirped once, as if mocking him, and that sound cut through Jake's exhaustion like a blade. His sanctuary had been invaded. For 6 years, he'd lived for this place. 3 bedrooms, a little lawn, and the prize. A 2-car garage where his grandfather's old workbench still bore the dents of decades-old projects. It was his refuge, the space where sawdust fell like snow and ideas turned into real things. He'd built treehouse pieces here for his daughter Emma, 8 years old and sunshine incarnate, who called every hammer Grandpa's sound. He'd spent years grinding through overtime, skipping vacations, and living on ramen to buy it. Willowbrook Estates looked safe on paper, $180 HOA fee, quiet cul-de-sac, neighbors who waved without getting too close. A place to rest after a life of grinding. But perfect neighborhoods have cracks that don't show up in listings. Her name was Brenda Whitfield. 52, coiffed hair like armor, perfume that arrived a second before she did. Her circular driveway looked like a luxury car dealership, and her smile was sharpened into something you could bleed on. Brenda wasn't just a neighbor, she was the HOA treasurer, a self-appointed gatekeeper of suburban virtue. She wielded her husband's job at the city planning office like a badge, and the HOA bylaws like commandments. Residents learned to dread the click of her heels on pavement. It was the sound of fines materializing out of nowhere. A trash can left out too long, a faded mailbox, a child's bike leaning against the wrong fence, all became evidence of declining property standards. She turned enforcement into theater. Clipboards and camera phones, early morning patrols, long Facebook posts about protecting community image. But Jake stayed invisible. He kept his grass manicured, his van parked neatly on the street, his head down. He had no time for suburban wars, until Brenda made war unavoidable. It started small. The first encounter came when he was helping elderly Mrs. Chen install motion sensor lighting after a string of break-ins. Jake was kneeling in the dirt, connecting wires under the evening sun, when her perfume swept over him like a storm front. Brenda stood there, clipboard hugged to her chest, eyes slicing through his work. That was her way, turning kindness into a violation. Mrs. Chen's modest decorations, wind chimes, solar lanterns, had already earned her fines for aesthetic disruption. Now she watched nervously from her porch as Brenda inspected Jake like a code violation waiting to happen. No matter how polite or factual he was, nothing could compete with her need to control. Every blue-collar hand offended her curated sense of order. After that day, Jake noticed her shadow everywhere. Measuring grass with a ruler. Snapping photos of driveways. Leaving warning slips on doors like suburban ransom notes. The neighborhood learned to scatter when she appeared. Emma, too young to know better, asked once why, "The pretty lady always looks like she smells something bad." Out of the mouths of children, truth without filter. For a while, he managed to live beneath her radar. But the night he came home from that emergency power job changed everything. He stood in the driveway, too tired to think, staring at the Audi filling his garage. It wasn't half-parked or wedged in, it was centered. Perfectly aligned, as if measured by laser. Her sense of entitlement extended down to inches. Inside the car, the seats gleamed under his workshop lights, reflecting back everything he'd built and everything she disrespected. His workbench, the tools from his grandfather's hands, the unfinished treehouse beams, all trapped behind her luxury SUV. He circled to the front door and froze. Brenda sat on his porch, scrolling through her phone like she owned the view. The heat clung to her designer outfit, but she looked composed, deliberate, completely unfazed. Jake's patience, hard-won from years of handling live wires, held him steady. Instead of exploding, he pulled out his phone and started recording. Her condescension cracked just a little when she realized she was on camera. Her words, sharp and rehearsed, stumbled into contradictions. Something about emergency parking and community cooperation. But the HOA bylaws didn't mention any of it. It was fiction, a rule invented on the spot by a woman who believed she could never be challenged. When he calmly pointed that out, she panicked, then snapped back with the arrogance of someone inured to consequences. She grabbed for his phone. He stepped back. One click, one video file, and the power dynamic shifted forever. By sunrise, the retaliation began. A bright orange violation notice hung from his front door. Failure to maintain community standards. Garage left open overnight. A handwritten note at the bottom twisted the knife. Maybe next time you'll be more cooperative, B. It would have been laughable if it weren't so malicious. He called his college roommate Derek, now a real estate attorney, who practically laughed through the phone. She fined you for her own trespass? That's gold. Keep every scrap of paper. So Jake did. He started a folder labeled HOA harassment, dates, photos, notices. Every insult documented. Then he went hunting for answers. The county courthouse smelled like dust and bureaucracy, but somewhere in those metal filing cabinets lay the truth about Willowbrook Estates. Jake spent his lunch break combing through incorporation papers, sipping bitter coffee, flipping through aging surveys until his fingers turned gray with old toner dust. What he found made his pulse quicken. The HOA's founding documents were sloppier than a novice wiring job. Their maps were preliminary drafts, not legal records. And the common property boundaries Brenda referenced? They were outdated and unenforceable. He left the courthouse with a thin smile, the kind that meant he'd just found the right circuit to cut. But Brenda wasn't done performing. By the time he got home, his inbox was glowing with a neighborhood-wide email from her account. Subject line: urgent security concern, resident violation. The message accused Jake of creating a hazard by leaving his garage unsecured. It ended with a warning about enhanced enforcement procedures. The smear campaign had begun. When Emma called that evening, her voice pulled him back to what mattered. "Daddy, is my treehouse almost done?" "Almost, sweetheart," he said, staring at the glowing subject line on his laptop. "Just a few obstacles to clear." The next day, the absurdity reached new heights. The Audi was still in his garage, and it had company. A black Mercedes now sat beside it, occupying the last square foot of space. His equipment cabinet, worth thousands, had been pushed aside and locked with a shiny new padlock that wasn't his. A sticky note fluttered on his grandfather's old Vice. Temporary relocation for client staging. Community cooperation appreciated. BW. The rage hit like a live wire, metallic, hot, dangerous. But years of handling 220 volts had taught Jake restraint. He reached for his phone again, not his tools. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, the patrol car's headlights cutting across the drive like truth through pretense. He listened, took photos, jotted notes. The steady click of his pen became the soundtrack of Brenda's undoing. Her voice pitched higher with every excuse. Community project, temporary storage, HOA initiative. Each phrase landed heavier than the last. Martinez stayed calm, expression flat, letting her dig deeper. Finally, he flipped his notebook closed. "Ma'am," he said, the weight of law behind every syllable, property deed trumps HOA agreements every time. "You might want to move your vehicles before this becomes a criminal matter." Her face drained of color. By sunset, both cars were gone. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a ghost of arrogance fading under the hum of cicadas. But Jake wasn't finished. The next morning, he drove to the county surveyor's office to confirm what he suspected. The clerk, an older woman with the energy of someone who'd seen too many power-hungry HOA board members, pulled up his property map. "See this line here?" she said, tapping the screen. "That's your boundary. Your garage is 100% on your land. The HOA's version? Outdated by 2 surveys. They don't own an inch of it. 18 inches of difference. That was all it took to dismantle Brenda's empire of intimidation. He left the office feeling something he hadn't in weeks: control. Outside, the suburban streets looked the same: manicured lawns, tidy mailboxes, the illusion of harmony. But underneath that calm facade, something was shifting. Brenda had crossed into private property, fabricated rules, and weaponized power. And Jake now held proof strong enough to collapse her paper kingdom. What began as a petty trespass had turned into a reckoning waiting to happen. Because in places like Willowbrook, justice doesn't roar, it hums quietly, building current until the lights go out for good. She thought my garage was community property. She had no idea she just wired her own downfall. Tell me, how would you have handled it? The county clerk's door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in months, the air felt light. That folder in my hand wasn't just paper, it was leverage. I'd walked into that office a frustrated homeowner. I walked out holding the blueprint to dismantle Brenda Whitfield's suburban empire. But power like hers doesn't go quietly. By Saturday morning, the digital battlefield was already burning. Brenda had declared war on every glowing screen in Willowbrook. Her Facebook campaign rolled out like a political smear operation: dramatic fonts, red-letter headlines, vague accusations about residents endangering neighborhood integrity. She even scheduled what she called an emergency HOA meeting, a phrase she wielded like a courtroom summons. The notice arrived in mailboxes stamped with urgent and mandatory attendance. Beneath the surface, it was nothing but a desperate move to restore control. Yet for all her planning, she forgot one thing: when you push good people too far, they push back harder. By mid-afternoon, her online post was imploding. The comment section turned into a public reckoning. Mrs. Chin, the quiet widow Brenda had fined for wind chimes, posted a full account of every harassment notice she'd received. Tom Rodriguez uploaded photos of his own citations, lined up like trophies of injustice. Sarah Mitchell, a librarian with an eye for details, screenshotted the actual HOA bylaws and circled every rule Brenda had fabricated. And the best part? A comment from Janet Martinez, Officer Martinez's wife, sat pinned at the top. Funny how some people think badges give them the right to other people's property. Face with rolling eyes. Within hours, Brenda's campaign of control had become a gallery of her own arrogance. Her allies stayed silent. The neighborhood, once afraid to speak, was now laughing out loud. But Brenda wasn't a quitter. The next move came early Sunday morning. The sound of paper tearing woke me. A bright orange sticker glared from my work van's windshield. City notice: illegal commercial vehicle. Towing scheduled Thursday. I stared at it for a long moment, the bitter taste of disbelief rising like bile. My van, parked legally on a public street to avoid HOA jurisdiction, was now somehow violating municipal code. Then I saw the signature: Brad Whitfield, City Planning Department. Brenda's husband had joined the war. The message was clear: if they couldn't control me through the HOA, they'd weaponize the city itself. That evening, Emma called. Her voice was pure light in the storm. She talked about her upcoming weekend visit, about painting the treehouse pink and hanging fairy lights. I told her yes, and that we might build it even bigger. What I didn't tell her was that the treehouse was about to become more than a project. It would become a boundary marker, a declaration of ownership. A symbol of where my land began and their influence ended. Because that small discovery, those 18 extra inches of property the county surveyor confirmed, was the spark that would expose everything. Monday evening descended like a stage curtain. The emergency HOA meeting took place at the local elementary school cafeteria, a place that still smelled of reheated macaroni and bleach. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and plastic chairs scraped against tile floors as a handful of residents wandered in, curiosity outweighing fear. At the center of it all sat Brenda. She wore authority like a costume: navy blazer, pearl earrings, expression carved in smug precision. On either side sat 2 bored loyalists. Harold, a retiree whose head bobbed in agreement before she even finished speaking, and Patricia, who looked like she'd been professionally trained to frown. The entire room reeked of artificial civility. Brenda opened the meeting with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. The agenda she handed out looked more like a legal indictment than community notes. Her proposal, new parking regulations allowing the HOA to fine homeowners for vehicular storage patterns disrupting community aesthetics. 3 pages of jargon disguised as power. Hidden in the footnotes, retroactive fines, $800, specifically for unauthorized garage usage. $800. For my own garage. I looked at her allies. Harold nodded eagerly. Patricia pursed her lips tighter. Brenda's voice echoed through the empty cafeteria, bouncing off metal chairs and bulletin boards filled with children's art. She thought she was untouchable. But she'd forgotten, electricians know circuits, and every system has a point where it overloads. Derek's voice echoed in my head. Most HOAs don't have the right insurance for half the things they enforce. Without it, board members are personally liable. So I asked to see the HOA's incorporation documents and insurance coverage, right there, in front of everyone. Silence dropped like a weight. Brenda's perfect posture faltered. The humming light above us seemed to grow louder, a swarm of trapped hornets filling the air. Then came her carefully crafted lie. The documents were under legal review. I smiled. No problem, I said, sliding my own copies onto the table. The paper made a crisp sound as it spread across the laminate surface, revealing everything she'd hoped to hide. The insurance exclusions were right there in black and white. No coverage for personal business activities, no protection for self-serving board decisions. And attached to that, my documentation of $23,000 in suspicious HOA expenses. Storm cleanup charges billed to the HOA but performed free by city crews. Landscaping fees paid to Brenda's own company. Emergency tree removal costs for trees that never existed. Each receipt was a spark in the fuse line. But the Rayal explosion came next. I pulled out a printout of Brad's city planning emails, obtained through a public records request. The first line froze the air in the room. Problem properties requiring community pressure to improve neighborhood composition. Target working-class homeowners for maximum leverage. The words hit harder than any shouting match ever could. Harold's jaw dropped. Patricia gasped audibly. Brenda's color drained away until her face matched the paper in my hand. Then the second email. Wife staging business needs 3-month access cycles. Recommend escalating HOA pressure on Morrison property for optimal client presentation timeline. They weren't enforcing community standards. They were running a coordinated real estate operation, manipulating homeowners through fear and pressure until they sold cheap. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was radioactive. Brenda's chair screeched back as she stood. Her voice, usually honeyed with authority, cracked under the weight of exposure. The metallic crash of the falling chair echoed like a gavel striking judgment. And just like that, the meeting was over. She stormed out, leaving her allies blinking under the cafeteria lights. But I knew better than to celebrate. People like Brenda don't surrender, they regroup. That truth hit me the next morning. My phone buzzed at 8:07 a.m., Derek's number flashing across the screen. His tone was different this time. Cautious, deliberate, almost reverent. "Jake, sit down," he said. "You're not going to believe what I found." The words poured out like voltage through copper. He'd spent the night cross-referencing Brenda's real estate license with state and county databases. What he uncovered wasn't neighborhood pettiness. It was organized crime in HOA clothing. Brenda's license? Under review for 2 active complaints of misrepresentation, both filed by elderly clients claiming she manipulated them into selling their homes below market value. Her mortgage? Underwater by almost $180,000. She wasn't just arrogant, she was desperate. But Derek wasn't finished. The final blow came like a thunderclap. Brad Whitfield, the city planner who'd authorized my fake towing notice, was officially under ethics investigation. A 6-month inquiry by the state attorney general's office had been quietly gathering evidence of corruption between city officials and private HOAs. Brenda and Brad's emails were the missing link, the proof of a county-wide scheme designed to exploit middle-class homeowners. Brad would identify target properties through zoning intel. Brenda would unleash a storm of HOA violations to pressure owners into panic sales. Once sold, the properties were flipped through Brenda's staging business at inflated prices, their inside knowledge guaranteeing profit after profit. It was systematic, deliberate, and predatory. My garage wasn't just a battleground, it was Exhibit A. I set my coffee down, the cup trembling slightly in my calloused hand. The irony stung. All that time, I thought I was fighting an entitled neighbor with a clipboard. But the truth was bigger, uglier, and far more dangerous. These people weren't just enforcing standards. They were weaponizing them, turning neighborhoods into hunting grounds for profit. Derek's words still rang in my head as I looked out over my quiet backyard, sunlight spilling across the grass where Emma's unfinished treehouse stood. That simple project, our little father-daughter dream, now sat on the most contested 18 inches of land in the county. And soon, everyone would know who it truly belonged to. Brenda thought she could hide behind bylaws and bureaucracy, behind polished smiles and forged rules. She thought the HOA shielded her. But every wall she built was made of paper. And the moment the truth hit public record, it would all burn. The investigation had begun, and for the first time since she rolled that Audi into my garage, the balance of power was shifting. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was exposing a machine built to destroy others like me. And the question wasn't whether Brenda would fall. It was how loud her empire would collapse when it finally did. She thought this was a neighborhood squabble. She didn't realize it was the end of her entire operation. What would you have done? Walked away, or lit the match? The day Derek dropped the full weight of what he'd uncovered, it was like the world shifted under my boots. The fluorescent hum of my garage lights, the smell of motor oil and sawdust, it all felt different now. Brenda's Audi still sat there, gleaming and smug, but I no longer saw a car. I saw evidence. A confession on 4 wheels. This wasn't just about some HOA treasurer drunk on power. This was a system, an engineered, predatory machine built on deceit, greed, and manipulation. Every violation, every inspection, every smug smile was part of something much bigger. Derek's voice still rang in my ears. She wasn't just facing neighborhood gossip anymore. She was staring down federal fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The gravity of it sank in like cold water through steel-toed boots. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was organized crime wearing a pearl necklace. It all started to make perfect sense. Mrs. Chen's aesthetic violation over her husband's memorial wind chimes? It wasn't about noise, it was about leverage. Her property backed up to land the city planned to rezone for a new community center, something Brad knew would send property values skyrocketing. Tom Rodriguez's eyesore work truck? It wasn't his vehicle Brenda hated. It was his driveway, part of a lot Brad's department knew would soon be approved for mixed-use development. And my garage? That had nothing to do with emergency parking. It sat on a corner lot, a prime position for a commercial entrance once the new shopping plaza project broke ground next spring. Every harassment notice, every fine, every rule was strategic, targeted, profitable. They weren't enforcing order, they were harvesting opportunity. By the time Derek finished laying it out, I felt the electricity of justice building in my chest. He'd found invoices from Brenda's staging company, proof she was billing clients for access to homes she only controlled through HOA intimidation. Brad's city emails mapped out zoning changes before they were public. Together, they'd created a private real estate pipeline fueled by harassment and insider information. The audacity was almost admirable. Almost. Derek chuckled darkly, the sound of a man who'd seen enough legal ugliness to appreciate when the guilty finally trip over their own paperwork. "You've got more power now than she's ever had," he'd said. And he was right. Because the moment I understood their entire operation, I realized this wasn't about getting my garage back. This was about burning the entire scheme to the ground. I didn't go to war alone. That Wednesday, I built what Derek jokingly called Team Justice, a group of neighbors who'd all suffered under Brenda's HOA dictatorship. But really, it felt more like assembling the world's most ordinary heist crew. My first stop was Mrs. Chen's garden. She was kneeling among rows of roses, hands steady, eyes sharp despite her age. The soft jingle of her wind chimes whispered through the morning breeze, tiny notes of defiance that Brenda had once called aesthetic pollution. Mrs. Chen had been waiting for this moment. She disappeared inside and returned with a shoebox that could have doubled as a legal archive. Inside were every letter, every violation, every photograph Brenda had ever sent her, meticulously dated, organized, cross-referenced. The level of detail would make an FBI analyst cry tears of joy. "My husband always said documentation beats confrontation," she said with a faint, proud smile. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just a quiet widow, she was our historian. Next was Tom Rodriguez. I found him half buried under the hood of his pickup, sleeves rolled, grease on his forearms, the rhythmic click of tools echoing like a steady heartbeat. The smell of diesel and determination filled the air. Tom had that calm confidence that only veterans carry, the kind of patience you can't fake. Turns out he'd been running his own silent counteroperation for months. He'd mapped Brenda's morning patrol routes, tracked her violation patterns, even logged the times she took photos of specific properties. And he'd done it all without her ever noticing. "Brother," he said with a grin that could light up an engine bay, "I've been waiting for this." Then there was Sarah Mitchell, the neighborhood's unofficial communications network. A third-grade teacher with the organizational skills of a military strategist. She arrived with a laptop, spreadsheets, and a look of calm fury. 4 months, she'd been running the neighborhood Facebook group like an intelligence operation. Every complaint, every bogus fine, every photo Brenda had ever posted was cataloged, time-stamped, and backed up. Her data completed the puzzle. Brenda wasn't just breaking rules, she was manufacturing them, using fake enforcement to manipulate real people into selling real property. By the time Derek arrived that evening, my kitchen table looked like a war room. Laptops open, papers spread across the surface, legal pads covered in timelines and strategy notes. The faint hum of my refrigerator blended with the low murmur of planning. This wasn't chaos. This was control. For the first time, we had it. Derek's legal plan was deceptively simple, like all great traps are. Step 1. File a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Board using Mrs. Chen's records as evidence. Once that complaint hit the system, an investigation into Brenda's license would be mandatory. Real estate boards hate corruption. It tarnishes their entire profession. Step 2. Forward Brad's emails to the State Attorney General's office. They were already knee-deep in an investigation into municipal corruption. Our evidence would hand them the missing puzzle pieces linking public officials to private gain. Step 3. File a civil lawsuit, not just for harassment, but under federal civil rights law. Because this wasn't random enforcement. Brenda's pattern showed clear discrimination, targeting working-class families, elderly residents, and anyone who didn't fit her ideal neighborhood profile. That wasn't just abuse of power. That was a civil rights violation. And step 4. The psychological strike. We were going to starve Brenda of control. The plan was risky but brilliant. I'd take my accumulated vacation time, disappear off the grid with Emma, and let Brenda implode on her own. Narcissists can't stand losing their target audience. They feed on reaction, on power. Take that away, and they unravel. Tom would house-sit and monitor everything through a network of discrete cameras he'd installed. Motion-activated, infrared, cloud-backed. Mrs. Chen would coordinate a watch system among the neighbors. Sarah would monitor social media, archiving every public meltdown Brenda had online. Derek called it strategic absence. I called it the calm before the storm. By the time Emma arrived for the weekend, my truck was packed with camping gear and a quiet sense of satisfaction. For once, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. 3 days into our Yellowstone trip, the world was peace. The smell of pine needles and campfire smoke, the rush of the river, the sound of Emma's laughter echoing between mountains, it felt like everything I'd fought for. Until my satellite communicator buzzed. A message from Tom: "She's lost her mind. Call when you can." The words tightened in my chest like a surge of static. I hiked uphill through the forest until the trees thinned and the sky opened above me, bars of signal flickering on the tiny screen. When I called, Tom picked up immediately. His voice carried the tension of someone who hadn't slept. "Day 1, he said. She tried to break into your garage with a crowbar." I sat down on a boulder that had probably been there since the Ice Age, staring out over the distant ridges as my pulse hammered. Day 2, she brought a locksmith. Claimed it was an emergency inspection. Said your wiring was dangerous. Tom's tone almost broke into laughter. The locksmith took one look at her and bailed. "But don't worry, I've got it all on video." He'd positioned cameras at every angle, infrared, motion-triggered, feeding directly to encrypted cloud storage. Brenda had no idea her every move was being captured in cinematic clarity. Day 3, he continued. She came back, with a city electrical inspector in tow. Claimed your garage had faulty wiring that was a hazard to the neighborhood. The name he said next made me smile despite the rage boiling underneath. Inspector Frank Morrison. No relation, but I knew the man. Straight shooter. One of the best. Frank had seen through her story instantly. When she couldn't provide a complaint number, he'd asked for her electrical license number instead. That was the moment the tide turned. She'd claimed to be an expert in front of a man who'd been inspecting systems since before she learned to spell it. Tom said the look on her face was priceless. Frank warned her that filing false emergency reports was a misdemeanor. Then he left, but not before handing Tom his card and promising to stay in touch. I sat on that mountainside, the wind cold against my face, the forest whispering below. This was no longer just justice. It was evolution. Brenda had spent years weaponizing rules, twisting order into oppression. Now, she was trapped in the very web she'd spun. The best part? She didn't even know how much worse it was about to get. Because while she flailed and lied and grasped for control, Derek's filings were already in motion. The state board, the attorney general, the civil complaint, all spinning silently in the background like gears in a machine that couldn't be stopped. And every move she made in my absence? Documented, time-stamped, ready to become evidence. She thought she could fake emergencies, manufacture authority, intimidate people into silence. But authority without truth is nothing more than a performance. And Brenda Whitfield's show was about to close. The mountain wind cut through the trees, whispering through the pines like a warning. Down below, Emma laughed, building a dam from smooth river stones, innocent and unaware that her father's fight back home had just entered its final act. I looked up at the sky, clean, endless, and free, and smiled. Because when I got back, I wasn't coming home to a war. I was coming home to finish it. She thought my silence meant surrender. She had no idea it was strategy. What happens when the hunter realizes she's the one being tracked? The mountain air carried that rare kind of silence, crisp, cold, and clean. Emma's laughter floated across the creek as she tested her little dam against the current, her world simple, innocent, unshaken. But 200 miles away, my phone's satellite link was lighting up with chaos. Tom's voice came through low and sharp, that steady tone veterans use when the absurd turns dangerous. "Jake," he said, "you won't believe what happened last night." The air around me seemed to still. Sometime around midnight, Brenda had shown up at my property again. This time, she wasn't there to argue about bylaws or flaunt fake authority. She had a butter knife, and she was trying to pick the lock on my garage door. When Tom confronted her, she spun a story so ridiculous it would have been laughable if it wasn't so dark. She claimed she'd heard strange noises and was investigating community safety. Tom, being Tom, recorded the entire thing. There she was, caught on camera, attempting to break into my garage while lecturing a Marine veteran about community safety. It was surreal, like watching someone fail their own lie while believing it was a noble cause. He'd already filed a police report for attempted burglary. Officer Martinez had reviewed the footage and told her to speak with a lawyer immediately. But Brenda's response wasn't silence or shame, it was fury. That same night, 2 a.m., she went on a public tirade. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, ranting about residents who prioritize vacation over community safety and dangerous electrical hazards that needed her urgent oversight. She hit post just minutes after getting caught breaking in. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to turn. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Street commented first, "Maybe people who break into garages at midnight aren't the best judges of safety." Within hours, her comment racked up dozens of likes. The tide had shifted. For the first time, Brenda wasn't feared, she was ridiculed. The mask was slipping. The next morning, Derek called. His tone was brisk but charged with restrained excitement. The State Real Estate Board had officially launched its investigation, fast-tracked thanks to Mrs. Chen's documentation. Brad's ethics hearing was scheduled, and the Attorney General's office had started reviewing his emails. The walls were closing in, and Brenda didn't even know it yet. Then Tom dropped another bomb. "She tried to bribe me," he said flatly. I froze. $500. That's what she offered him, cash, in an envelope, to let her into my garage for 1 hour to retrieve important staging materials. But those materials looked an awful lot like my missing electrical tools. Tom, always a professional, had recorded the entire exchange. Her voice was clear, confident, desperate, offering not just money, but influence. "I can make your city permits go through faster if we cooperate." And with that, she handed us everything we needed, clear proof of bribery and corruption. I looked out over the lake. Emma was crouched by the stream, proudly pointing at a fish she trapped in her rock pool. Her voice echoed off the mountains, bright and pure. It was a reminder of what really mattered. Family. Integrity. While I was here teaching my daughter how to build something real, Brenda was back home destroying herself, brick by brick. "Keep recording," I told Tom. "She's just getting started." 9 days into our trip, the mountain sky had that silvery glow that comes right before rain. Emma caught her first rainbow trout, grinning from ear to ear, and I thought, maybe the worst was behind us. That's when my communicator buzzed again. This time it wasn't Tom. It was Sarah. Her message was short, urgent, and ice-cold. "Emergency. Brenda hired someone to break in. Police involved. Call SAP." The irony didn't escape me. My daughter was learning to gently release a fish into the current while back home. Brenda was trying to steal what wasn't hers, again. I called Sarah the moment I got a signal. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline, "she's completely lost it." The story was almost too ridiculous to believe. That morning, Brenda had approached Tom again, this time with a briefcase full of cash. When he refused, she moved to Plan B, hire a stranger. By 2 p.m., Tom spotted a man in a dirty hoodie crouched near my garage with bolt cutters. When confronted, the guy claimed to be a licensed contractor working for the HOA. No paperwork, no permit, no ID, just a handwritten note on Brenda's personal letterhead. Tom called Officer Martinez. When the police arrived, the man immediately cracked. He told them Brenda had paid him $200 cash to retrieve staging materials from a garage that needed to be accessed for community safety. The phrase, community safety, had become her signature lie. But now, it was a felony. The list of crimes was stacking up faster than Emma's growing pile of souvenir rocks. Attempted burglary. Conspiracy to commit breaking and entering. Filing false emergency reports. Bribery. Solicitation. Every step she took made the case stronger. And then the hammer fell. "The nuclear bomb dropped this morning," Sarah said. Her tone changed, half disbelief, half satisfaction. The Attorney General's office executed a search warrant at her house and her real estate office. Cameras were rolling. For a moment, I just stared at the water, listening to the wind ripple through the pines. Channel 7 was there, Sarah continued. Brenda in her bathrobe, screaming about property rights while agents carried out boxes of files. And Brad? Arrested at his city office, right in front of his coworkers. I sat down on a fallen log, staring at the lake, trying to wrap my head around how fast this had all escalated. My quiet suburban nightmare had turned into a televised raid. The search warrants revealed everything. Financial ledgers showing HOA funds siphoned into Brenda's personal accounts. Digital records proving she'd been using community money for private staging work. And the worst part, a spreadsheet. A list of targeted homeowners. Each name came with notes, cold and calculated, elderly widow, vulnerable to safety concerns. Working-class Hispanic, likely to avoid legal action. Single father, electrician, corner lot, pressure through child-related leverage. I found my own life summarized in her handwriting. My hard work, my sacrifices, my daughter, all reduced to development potential. It wasn't just fraud, it was cruelty, engineered, and efficient. But this went beyond Willowbrook. Sarah told me 4 other HOA board members across the county had been arrested that morning. It was an organized network, multiple neighborhoods, hundreds of properties, millions of dollars in manipulated sales. Derek's evidence had blown open a 5-year real estate conspiracy spanning half the region. And at the center of it all stood Brenda and Brad Whitfield, the suburban royalty who thought they were untouchable. By noon, the news channels had turned their story into a spectacle. The treasurer who weaponized an HOA to commit fraud. The city planner who sold insider zoning information. The neighbors who exposed them both. And me, the homeowner who fought back. Sarah's voice softened. Jake, you're officially a witness now. The Attorney General's office wants to talk to you when you're back. You're the guy who cracked the case. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not because of pride, but because it meant it was finally over. Then she added one last detail. By the way, Brenda called you 17 times yesterday. I didn't say anything. 17 voicemails, Sarah continued. Starts angry, then sobbing. She's begging you not to press charges. Says she'll drop everything. Even offered to buy your house, above market value, if you make it all go away. I looked out at the lake again, watching Emma toss another perfect skipping stone. 7 skips before it disappeared beneath the glassy surface. Clean water. Clean air. No lies. Save those voicemails, I said. They'll come in handy. Because in 3 days, we'd be going home. Back to Willowbrook. Back to the wreckage she'd built with her own hands. Day 14, homecoming. As we turned down our familiar street, it didn't look familiar at all. News vans lined the curbs. Tripods and cables sprawled across driveways. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering, pointing. And there, still taped off with yellow police tape, sat Brenda's Audi. Abandoned. Daddy, why are there so many people? Emma asked, her face pressed against the window. Because sometimes, I said quietly, when you stand up to bullies, people finally start paying attention. Tom met us in the driveway with a grin that could power the whole grid. He handed me a folder so thick it could stop a bullet. Welcome home, he said. Hope you're ready for your close-up. Inside the folder was every piece of evidence we'd gathered, 17 recorded break-ins, 3 police reports, 1 arrest, and hours of crystal-clear footage. Channel 7 had already set up across the street. The reporter wanted the shot framed perfectly. My garage in the background, Brenda's Audi front and center, the $40,000 monument to her downfall. 2 weeks of abandonment hadn't been kind to it. Dust streaked the paint, the tires sagged, and the license plate hung loose, a silent symbol of everything she'd lost. Detective Sarah Rodriguez arrived soon after, clipboard in hand, professionalism written across her face. She walked me through the next steps. Brenda's arraignment, the pending charges, the recovery of stolen funds. It was surreal hearing it laid out like a crime drama, because for months, it had been my reality. Behind her, news crews adjusted their cameras. Neighbors leaned on fences, whispering to each other. And in the background, Emma's laughter drifted from the backyard as she climbed into her half-built treehouse. A new beginning built where the corruption had fallen. That evening, the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Willowbrook Estates, painting the street in gold and amber light. The air smelled like summer again, cut grass, sawdust, freedom. And as the camera lights flicked on and microphones hovered near, I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a warning, a blueprint, proof that no matter how loud or powerful someone seems, truth has a way of finding its own microphone. The news anchor's voice carried across the cul-de-sac, the homeowner who exposed a county-wide HOA fraud ring through strategic vacation planning. I almost laughed. They made it sound like an adventure film. But it wasn't about strategy or luck. It was about endurance. About knowing when to fight and when to let the truth do the fighting for you. Brenda had spent years pretending to be the gatekeeper of perfection. Now, she was the headline of her own downfall. And as I looked out at my garage, still standing, still mine, I couldn't help but wonder. What happens to people like her when the rules they wrote finally turn against them? The detective's voice carried the calm precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime untangling lies. She stood there beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of my garage, clipboard balanced against one palm, and gave me a look halfway between admiration and disbelief. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "your documentation didn't just protect you, it cracked the largest HOA fraud case in state history." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. 14 people. 6 counties. An entire web of corruption that had started with something as small, as stupid, as one woman parking in a garage that wasn't hers. I remember the faint hum of the overhead bulb, the faint scent of motor oil and sawdust, remnants of everything this battle had begun over. The garage that started it all had become evidence, a symbol, the spark that burned down a quiet empire of greed. The detective explained how the case had exploded outward. City planners, real estate brokers, mortgage officers, HOA board members across multiple districts. It wasn't a feud, it was organized crime under the guise of suburban order. They'd weaponized regulation, turned community into currency, and profited off the suffering of working families. And somehow, the line I'd drawn in the dirt, not in my garage, had been the thread that unraveled everything. By 5 that evening, the neighborhood cafeteria was unrecognizable. The same space that once hosted bake sales and parent-teacher nights was now packed shoulder to shoulder with 47 families, local reporters, and enough adrenaline to light up half the county. This was no longer about me. It was about all of us who'd been measured, fined, threatened, and silenced. Sarah Mitchell had called it a community accountability meeting, but the energy in the room felt closer to a liberation rally. People were done whispering behind curtains. Done waiting for justice to arrive. Derek arrived late, sleeves rolled, papers in hand. The look on his face said it all. This was the moment he'd been building toward. When he spoke, his voice carried the calm confidence of someone who knew every word would land like a hammer blow. Brenda's real estate license? Revoked, permanently. Brad's city position? Terminated, banned from municipal work. Their home? Foreclosed, stripped bare by the same financial system they'd manipulated for years. And both? Facing federal fraud charges with prison terms that could stretch 2 decades. The room erupted. The applause wasn't just celebration, it was release. Then Derek delivered the part that made it all worth it. The civil settlement, he announced, includes funding for a community legal defense fund. From this day forward, no homeowner in Willowbrook will ever stand alone against HOA harassment again. The sound that followed wasn't clapping, it was thunder. People rose to their feet. Some shouted. Some cried. Mrs. Chen stood trembling at the front, holding a framed photo of her late husband, tears streaking down her cheeks. "My Henry fought for democracy overseas," she said softly. "He would have loved seeing it finally work here." That broke something open in the room. For months, fear had ruled this place. Now, for the first time, it felt like home again. Tom Rodriguez took the microphone next. His posture straight, his voice firm. The veteran-turned-neighborhood watchman looked out over the crowd like a man giving orders one last time. What Jake did, he said, wasn't just about his garage. It was about every family who's been told we don't belong. Every working man and woman who's been made to feel small in their own home. And then came the final act. Sarah wheeled out a small speaker and hit play. Brenda's voicemails echoed through the cafeteria, one after another. It started with arrogance. "You need to return immediately and resolve this situation." The room murmured. Then threats. "My husband's position gives us options you haven't considered." Guess. Then the bargaining began. "I'll drop all violations if you'll just let me explain." And finally, the collapse. A voice, once dripping with superiority, now shaking with tears. "Please, Jake. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted to control something. Everything's falling apart. I thought if I could make the neighborhood perfect, maybe Brad would stop drinking. Maybe we could fix things. The room fell silent. It was almost tragic, the sound of someone realizing too late that control doesn't equal happiness. That power built on fear always collapses inward. Almost tragic. Officer Martinez stood from the back, his uniform crisp beneath the fluorescent light. His words cut through the stillness like a gavel. "Justice isn't always pretty," he said. "But it's necessary." When Channel 7 turned their camera on me for a final comment, I wasn't thinking about victory. I was thinking about that first night I came home exhausted from work, boots heavy with dust, and found her Audi parked in the place I'd built for my peace. With 47 neighbors watching, my daughter stacking building blocks in the back of the room, I said the only truth that mattered. All I ever wanted was to use my own garage. Turns out, sometimes defending the smallest things ends up protecting the biggest ones, like the right to live free from someone else's control. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Emma's little hands clapped until they turned pink. And somewhere across town, in a sterile holding cell under flickering fluorescent lights, Brenda Whitfield finally understood what I'd been trying to teach her all along. Karma doesn't take vacation days. 6 months later, summer returned to Willowbrook. The lawns were greener, the air lighter. The fear that once lived under every porch light was gone. Emma's treehouse, our treehouse, stood proudly at the edge of the yard. We built it exactly 18 inches past the old boundary line Brenda once claimed wasn't mine. Every inch a reminder that ownership isn't just legal, it's moral. Emma hung upside down from the rope ladder, her hair swinging in the breeze, reciting the treehouse rules to her best friend like a tiny philosopher. Rule 1, no mean people allowed. Rule 2, always share snacks. Rule 3, if you're mean to someone's daddy, you don't get to climb up here, ever. She'd learned more about power, justice, and integrity at 8 years old than Brenda ever did in 52. A week earlier, the settlement had been finalized. $12,000 in damages, plus attorney's fees, paid out of the insurance policy covering HOA misconduct. Derek had been right from the start. Act outside your authority, and your shield becomes your liability. But I didn't keep the money. Instead, I used it to start something bigger, the Willowbrook Property Rights Defense Fund. $12,000 in seed money. Derek donating his hours. Mrs. Chen volunteering as ombudsman for elderly residents. Our small neighborhood had created a free legal aid network for any homeowner targeted by HOA abuse. Within a month, the fund had helped 3 families already. The same tactics Brenda used, phony fines, harassment, threats, were cropping up in other subdivisions. But now, word was spreading. There were people ready to fight back. No more intimidation. No more silent suffering. Mrs. Chen had become a local legend. She ran workshops for other counties, teaching residents how to document violations, preserve evidence, and protect themselves. She called them her Democracy in Action classes. The name fit. Tom Rodriguez, once fined for parking his truck in his own driveway, was now head of the reformed HOA board. First order of business, full transparency. Every expense posted online, every decision open to review. Property values rose 8% in 6 months. Turns out, people will pay extra to live somewhere run by integrity, not ego. Sarah Mitchell's small Facebook group turned into a full YouTube channel, the HOA Accountability Network. She taught homeowners how to research bylaws, file complaints, and expose corruption. 50,000 subscribers and counting. And Derek? He built an entire division around HOA defense law. 2 new attorneys, a waiting list of clients, and a plaque on his office wall that read, "Justice begins in the garage." Life, finally, was quiet again. Emma and I spent our evenings grilling burgers in the backyard, the air warm with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. Sometimes, when the light hit the treehouse just right, it looked like a monument, built not from lumber, but from patience, perseverance, and a refusal to be small. One evening, she looked up from her plate, her face smeared with ketchup. "Daddy," she asked, "are you proud of what we did?" I looked at her, this kid who'd watched her dad fight bullies with proof instead of fists, who'd learned that courage could be quiet. "I'm proud of what you did," I said. "You were patient while Daddy learned how to be brave." She smiled. Can we go camping again this summer? Absolutely, I told her. This time, just for fun. August rolled around, and with it, a new tradition, garage door day. Every year, the whole neighborhood gathered in my driveway to celebrate the day ordinary people proved that corrupt authority doesn't get the final word. Kids drew chalk art of treehouses and heroes. Adults shared stories of small victories, broken fences repaired, gardens planted without permission slips. It wasn't just a party. It was a reminder, democracy only works when citizens refuse to look away. Brenda and Brad eventually pleaded guilty. She got 18 months in minimum security prison. He got 2 years and a permanent ban from city employment. Their McMansion sold at auction for 60% of its value, a fitting discount for a house built on deception. Karma, it turns out, is expensive real estate. This whole story began with something tiny. A luxury car parked where it didn't belong. But it ended with something enormous: federal convictions, community reform, and a movement that stretched beyond county lines. Sometimes, the biggest revolutions begin in the smallest spaces. So here's my question for you. What would you do if someone tried to take your peace, your home, your dignity, under the name of authority? Because the truth is, stories like mine aren't rare. They're everywhere. And they only stop when good people stop staying quiet. Drop your own HOA nightmare story in the comments. Someone out there might need to know they're not alone. And if you think this story was wild, wait until next week. A city inspector tried to condemn a woman's house for having too many books. What he didn't know: that librarian fought back with a forgotten law that turned the city upside down. Because here in Willowbrook and in Emma's treehouse, our rules are simple. No mean people allowed.